Hello, everybody. Let me know if the audio video is coming through okay. This is episode 4 of Second Mind Medicine. So I'll wait for a few people to log on. Just let me know the audio video is coming through. And I'll talk about a couple things. One is people are asking about where the previous videos are. So let me type in the link to that. This is where you can find the prior 2, 3, 4 videos. All right. All right. Looks like the comments are coming through. Johnsky, Michelle Brown, Ursula from Toronto. Great. All right. Sarah Edge, Chad. Great. All right. Good to see everybody coming through. Not see the YouTube coming through, but hopefully that's streaming there as well. All right. So while we wait for everyone to log in, let's just take a couple moments. Relaxing through the layers of the human identity. The physical structure, feeling your hands, the feet, the seat under you, the outermost body. And then moving inwards, as we say, to the subtler experience of mind, of thoughts, of understanding, of misunderstanding, of clarity and doubt, and emotions arising. And then moving beyond this, shifting attention, making it subtler, to the feeling of being here in some form. That energy of simply being here, the buzz of being here, the buzz that modifies itself as our thoughts and feelings with no clear defined boundary, yet still localizing in some way. And now, even subtler, to the state of potential itself. then back. Coming to the sensation of localizing the buzzing. And if there are thoughts, noting these and opening our eyes and interacting and recognizing the physicalized structure. Right, we talk about the five bodies. These are not fundamentally different. These are apparently different. They are modifications. Just like a still lake modifies itself as ripples, a still lake modifies itself as the wake of the boat that's running through the lake. Right? Similarly, in this model of second mind medicine, the ontological primitive is consciousness. Consciousness is primary and is self-modifying like the ripples of water as information, energy, thoughts and feelings, and the physicalized structure. All right. So thanks for all the questions. There were some amazing questions. The questions are getting more involved, which is great because we're presenting this a little bit at a time each week. And I can see that it's starting to come together. The different parts are starting to come together, whether it's the pillars that we talked about, or the five bodies, or the approach to this, the overall approach, the primacy of consciousness. There are a lot of pieces to get to this, like a puzzle that we're trying to put together. So we're going to do this week by week. The videos are available at secondmindmedicine.com/videos. And we'll continue today with talking about multi-directional healing, but specifically we're going to do it through answering a question. So I think it will be more helpful here. All right. So another thing I wanted to let you know about is I'm trying to communicate this in a subtler way to a broader community, including to the physician community in emergency medicine. Right. My own specialty is emergency medicine. And so I just want to present to you an article that was recently written. I'll post it over here. Jen Marler, hello. Good to see you. So this is a recent article in Emergency Medicine News, which I authored, that doesn't talk about second mind medicine in the detail that we're talking about here. It would be too much to bring together in one place, but introducing the idea of looking at consciousness in traditional medicine, or in modern medicine, I guess we would say, right? We talk about consciousness in the emergency department a lot, actually, but we usually talk about it in terms of loss of consciousness when we say a person, quote unquote, passes out, right? We talk about loss of consciousness, or in sedation, we talk about levels of consciousness, but we need to look into more about what this actually is. What is consciousness beyond the ways that we classically talk about it? So that is something what we're trying to do here in this article. All right, so let me just address one question, and we will use that to explore this more deeply and pull some of these different ideas that is second mind medicine together, and also talk about multi-directional healing in that context. So the question was, somebody says, I want to try this model of healing. 4 years bedbound with chronic illness. I know this makes perfect sense, this model of healing, second mind medicine. I can heal if I can integrate all my parts, right? So this person is asking about something very practical. Okay, so how do I do this? In fact, she said, I want to be a guinea pig for this model of healing. And so what I want to say is there's nothing about being a guinea pig here, or trying something that's strange, or trying something that's not recommended. We're not talking about any of those things here. What we're talking about in second mind medicine is simply expanding our idea of what is possible, right? In no part of this are we saying that a particular approach is wrong at all costs and it should not be done at all costs, right? depending on where the level of understanding of a society is, depending on the nature of the condition, depending on what a person believes and has available to them, different modalities are used. And in my view, as an ER doc, I think we need to make use of whatever works. And so, how do we do this? How do we apply this model? Let's look at this. First of all, when we're talking about second mind medicine, we're talking about two key principles, right? If we're to distill the whole thing and say, what are the key principles we're talking about here? There are two. And one is that in this model, we are recognizing complete human anatomy. All right. Rather than saying, and we've talked about this in detail before, rather than saying that we are primarily physical or only physical, or maybe we have some kind of mind too, some thoughts, some feelings, we're saying, no, there are actually multiple levels of being human. And all of them are, in a way, our anatomy, and we need to address all of them. That's one key principle in second mind medicine, right? The second key principle is that of the primacy of consciousness, saying that the innate nature of things, including of this human being and all human beings, the innate nature is of potential and consciousness, right? These are synonymous in this case. Potential and consciousness are synonymous, right? So when we put these two together, when we say that, wait a second, there's so many more layers to being human, and here is that model. Here is that model of the complete human being. And when we say that not only are these layers present, but the essence of them, the core of them, is a potential state that we're going to call consciousness. All right. And that's often misunderstood. We've talked about that in many different talks, especially if you look in the last series, Is This a Dream? We've talked about that extensively. But we're saying that our nature is potential and it modifies as these 5 layers. These are the two key principles. What are the implications now? Of these two principles, what are the implications? Number one is that healing is always possible, right? Not as a whim or a fancy, not as a random hope. We're saying no, healing is actually possible. In any case, healing is possible, right? Why is it not just whim? Why is it not just a fancy? Well, because the principles of recognizing complete anatomy is based on sound reasoning. We have good analytical and experiential evidence for these models of human anatomy, right? We have evidence of how we think about the human being that we can put forth as human anatomy, right? When we looked at the 5 bodies, we looked at how the very understanding of human anatomy changes over time as our own understanding and as our own perception changes, right? So that's one reason why when we say that healing is always possible, we're not just saying it as a wish, right? We're saying it based in sound reasoning, all right? The other reason we can say that healing is always possible is because we're not just thinking of healing in one way, right? If I have a cut on my finger and we say we want treatment for that, if you go to the ER because of a severe cut, then healing is essentially one thing in this frame. It is closing that cut. It is reintegration of the disruption in the skin. But what we're saying is that healing is much more than that, actually, right? There's the experience of pain, there's the experience of suffering, there's all that which pain and suffering touches. If we look at pain and suffering in a broader context, we can see that pain and suffering is one entity and it appears at different levels in different ways, in the physical structure, in the mental structure, and deeper energetic discord that we may be able to sense, right? So why is healing always possible? Because of this sound reason, and also because we are looking at it at a broad sense. It's important to understand here that this doesn't mean that healing is going to happen in the way I want it to happen or somebody else wants it to happen, right? So somebody has been given a particular diagnosis and I want this diagnosis to go away, and so I'm going to use this and it's going to go away. That's not the idea here. What we're saying is healing is always possible, and we don't know what form that is going to take, right? And here we reference the talk on healing that we talked about before, right? We talked about healing in at least 2 ways. One is healing of the part, healing of a particular thing, a particular disruption, and then healing in the form of recognizing the fullness and experiencing the fullness of being human, which is a different kind of healing that then changes how we see the first kind of healing. When we recognize the whole, it changes how we experience and need and depend on the healing of the part. All right, so I hope it's becoming clear why we're talking about this sequentially, because we're slowly putting all of these puzzle pieces together. All right, so let's keep going with this here. So implications of the two principles. What are the two principles? The principle of complete human anatomy, defining complete human anatomy, and defining consciousness as primary and the potential state as primary, which self-modifies as the different layers of our anatomy. All right, so the implications are healing is always possible. The other is that now everyone becomes an expert in their own right, right? To some extent, we have to become experts in our own health. And that doesn't mean that our expertise puts down somebody else's expertise. It doesn't mean that our expertise says that, well, the other person's view is not valid. I think that's where we run into problems, where we become dogmatic about this, right? It simply means that every person, the data that we have access to on ourselves is unavailable to others, right? Some of it, of course, through indirect measurements, right? Through getting blood work or through getting some kind of imaging, an X-ray or a CAT scan, by doing certain kinds of tests, an electrocardiogram and electroencephalogram. These are different ways of gaining information from another person. But there's so much in terms of mental state, emotional state, thoughts, beliefs, how they simply feel their own existence, how they feel their own presence, that we don't even talk about, let alone try to gain as information. Because the entire philosophical framework says that no, the physical structure is primary and all that stuff is secondary or doesn't matter, right? So all this to say that the feeling that each of us is an expert in our own right in terms of what is happening with us has to be valued. We need a place for that in a framework or an approach to healing. And so these are two of the large-scale implications of our first two principles. One, healing is possible, and the second is that we are also experts. Each of us is also an expert by virtue of simply being human and having the ability to see and feel what is happening with ourselves. All right, so two key principles. We talked about the implications. Now, what is the process? How do we engage this process then of second mind medicine? The first and the easiest is lifestyle changes that we talked about. We talked about the 4 pillars, right? Let me see if I have it here. I do have it here. All right, so here's the link to the 4 pillars. And so before we talk about doing anything else, right, trying new methods of healing or looking into other things or even trying established methods of healing, right, even when we're talking about something like a broken bone, right, when the process is to realign the bone and immobilize it so that the bone regrows and it heals itself, even when we know what to do in that sense, or even with a small cut that we wouldn't go to the doctor for because we know it would heal on its own, there are still some fundamental practices of healing that have been timeless and that are true. And that is what these 4 pillars are, right? The pillars of nutrition, movement, rest, and connection. These are timeless. These are true across all cultures in all situations. All right. So the reason this is important is because very often we hear, oh, it's a lifestyle change. We got to make lifestyle changes and that's it. Well, it's not that that's it, but that is low-hanging fruit where we can start. At least one thing, some change we can make. The reason it's not the only thing is because if I'm making these lifestyle changes, but I believe that it's all about my physical structure, because that's the philosophical view I have, then I'm going to be missing out on a lot of the kinds of healing that are possible, right? If I make these changes, but I don't understand how they relate to how I feel about myself or how they relate to the kind of work that I'm doing. Same thing. It has limited effects, right? So this is the low hanging fruit, but it has to be seen in this broader context that we talked about before, these two principles. All right. Ursula says, are you showing those charts? I'm not sure which charts. I just posted a link for the four pillars that we talked about. I will show the chart of the 5 bodies. Yes, we are going to come to that soon. All right. So that's the first thing. Now the second thing is, let me see if I can show the screen now, Ursula, that you were asking about. All right, can everyone see this? Let's see. All right, I think it's showing up here. So once we engage the 4 pillars, we start making those changes. The next thing is to spend time introspecting into these bodies that we talk about, right? This is something that we usually don't do because the system is set up that if there's a disease, then I go to an expert outside of myself and then they diagnose and treat, right? Of course, we can do that. Of course, we should do that. But the key is in recognizing that another person's expertise is in a particular kind of view, right? Whether it's a physical view, a particular philosophy, whatever it is. And we have to then accommodate or find room for other views that may be helpful in our healing. All right. So after engaging the 4 bodies, now it's time to introspect into these different bodies, right? The 4 pillars and those practices and those changes will facilitate these, because engaging those 4 pillars will start to let the mind start to calm down, start to become more subtle, and make it more perceptive, make it more intuitive. All right. And with that frame of mind, now we start introspecting, right? Into simply noticing these different levels of our anatomy. Just saying, as we did in our meditation, right? We did it in 3 minutes, right? But spending 10 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour doing some of this daily to see that, okay, I see what the physical layer is, right? And I can experience maybe there's some pain associated with the way the physical body is. Simply noticing that and then shifting to the thoughts, right? Feeling the kinds of beliefs that exist in relation to this experience, feeling the emotions that exist. Maybe there's fear, maybe there's anger, maybe there's sadness, maybe there's anxiety, right? Becoming aware of this mental layer and connecting the dots between the physical experience and this mental experience. And slowly, as this mind becomes subtler, letting this go and starting to feel that underlying what we might call energy, right? There's no great word for it in English, but let's call it energy, right? That under the feeling of being here, right? The kind of buzz or the localizing feeling of being here, that in yoga might be described as chakras, in Chinese medicine may be described as meridians, in the Thai culture they may be called sen lines, right? There are different ways to describe this. We don't have to give them any particular name, but becoming sensitive to this is important. Now, what is the benefit of doing this kind of introspection and recognizing it? This is because as we do this, there are certain layers of our experience that will call our attention, right? There'll be certain layers that capture our attention, where we'll want to linger. If that's the case, then that's the place that we can focus on. That's the place that requires more attention, right? It's almost like a compass that shows you what direction we have to move in. All right. If I'm contemplating or feeling that physical structure, certainly we need to act at that level. And in society today, in our world society today, that's already understood that yes, there needs to be action at the physical level. And we can go to the relevant experts for that. Then comes the mind. Maybe if I'm focusing on that pain or focusing on that sense of suffering, maybe it connects to another event, something I experienced in my childhood, something I experienced in relationship with something else, or something that doesn't even make sense. Maybe it's an image that comes up. Maybe it's a feeling that comes up that doesn't quite make sense. But what we're doing is trusting that all of this is related. Why? Because our inner nature is potential and we're taking consciousness as fundamental. So that which is coming up in some way is relevant. And so engaging this at the mental body, maybe it's journaling, maybe it's talking to a friend, maybe it's choosing one of the hundreds of healing modalities in the world, right? There's so many healing modalities in the world. How do you know which one to choose? Well, it's a convergence of your introspection and where that brings you, right? What layer of yourself it brings you to, and the modalities that are available, the people that are available, where those two come together, where those two feel like something we want to explore, and where there's open-mindedness, that's the place to act, right? Why do I say open-mindedness? Because it should not be that, okay, I'm going to try a new kind of healing system or a new way to approach this, and I'm never going to do this again. I'm not going to do what my doctor said. I'm not going to do what this other person said. In my view, that's not the way to go about it, right? In terms of an overall framework. For each individual person, that's going to be different. But what we're talking about is an overall framework. It's good to stay open-minded about the different modalities. All right, so the convergence of where our attention is called, because our own system has the intelligence that's needed. So where our intelligence is called as we're exploring our bodies, where that meets what is available, right? The people that are available, the other modalities that are available, that is the place to explore healing. All right, so in terms of the process, we talked about the 4 layers. We talked about the 4 pillars, I'm sorry. We talked about spending time introspecting, getting to know these bodies. And then we talked about giving attention to that which is calling us the most and finding where that converges with the practices that are available. Now, in doing these processes, in trying new processes, I think it's always good to keep 2 points of reference, right? In addition to what we're doing. One is a good friend, right? That can be a family member, it can be anybody. But a good friend that knows you is a good person to talk through this with, right? Because it can always give us some context into what we're trying. And the other is to keep in touch with your healthcare professional. If you're seeing a doctor, if you're seeing some kind of healthcare professional, it's a good idea to let them know what you're looking at. Because this shouldn't be something that contradicts or creates problems with other avenues of healing that you're trying. This is simply opening up the doors to many more ways to healing. All right, so the 4 important points here in the process. One is engaging the 4 pillars. The second is beginning to introspect into our own bodies and the layers of being human, our own anatomy. The third is noting where our attention is called in these layers of the body, right? What is arising in our awareness, and where does that converge with the modalities of healing that are available around us? That's the third one. And then fourth is keeping 2 points of contact, a good friend and any healthcare professionals that you're working with. These are the processes by which the principles of second mind medicine and the implications of healing being possible and we also being experts are actualized. And this is an endless process because the more we engage the 4 pillars, the more introspection we do, the more we try new things, the more insight is going to come up, right? And the more kinds of healing are going to show up. Healing can show up as understanding, as knowing what to do, as decrease in pain, as having a broader view, or as our own condition changing. There are many ways in which healing shows up. And that's a cyclical feedback loop to once more engage in more introspection, more action, more communication. All right. So Lindsay says, but many Western doctors are against holistic procedures, right? So this is where a conversation is important, right? There are two reasons. One is that the idea in Western medicine, the philosophy of Western medicine is completely different. And so whether holistic procedures or other kinds of treatments are possible or not, it depends on the physician that you see. It's certainly not true of all physicians, because many physicians understand that there are other philosophies, other models of anatomy, other ways of approaching healing. But certainly, yes, some doctors will feel that way. So that's a decision you'll have to make, a conversation that you'll have to have. But I know many physicians, including my own friends, who encourage people to try things as long as they're not doing things to affect the treatment or what they're doing now, right? That's where it becomes a tougher situation. But certainly to start with, there are plenty of physicians that encourage people to try other modalities as well. All right. Let's see. Denise says, being congruent with self and openness is useful for me in my healing and mindfulness. Yes, and that's exactly what we're talking about, is we're talking about an alignment, a congruence among all layers of the system, right? You might be able to treat the outer structure, the physical structure, but if the internal system is still misaligned, then it can still show up. All right. So what are some of the results from this? Let's see. So one is healing in the many ways that we talked about, right? A broader understanding of healing and a broader experience of healing. Another result is moving past fear and this paralysis, right? So many times, if we are not experts and if everybody else is the expert, then there's a kind of fear that can arise because we don't know what to do. We don't know what the next step is. But through this framework of second mind medicine, we can see that there's a clear progression in what is possible and what we can do. We didn't go into all of it here because the 5 bodies we've talked about, the 4 pillars we've talked about, so please go into those more. But there's always some action we can take if we choose, right? We are not saying that we're going to cure everything, just try real hard, just be positive, just believe. No, I don't take that perspective. I think that can actually be a harmful perspective because it puts a lot of pressure on a person as if the problem is localized in a person. And that's not what we're saying. We're simply saying that if we want to take a broader perspective, there is always some action, some choice, some direction that we can move in as experts that does lead to healing. And that has a snowball effect because the result of that is only more intuition and more action. All right. So healing is one result. Moving past fear is another one that we talked about. The other big component of this is that we are making healing, we're making disease and healing systemic phenomena, systemic events, right? Right now, what we do is we localize disease and health in a person. But that's not at all the case, right? We are embedded, we are floating in a sea of information. Our entire society, our entire world, we can see it as a sea of information, right? So it's key that that becomes part of our model, right? It's a social and systemic phenomenon that we're talking about that is second mind medicine. And it's there in the model of anatomy, because as we go deeper, it is less and less localized. The physical structure is, of course, localized. You can have GPS coordinates in space and time, right? But as you get to mind, the mind is much less localized, right? The mind can go here or it can go somewhere else in just a moment, thinking about something else, right? As we get to energy, as we get to information, right? We know energy is everywhere, information is everywhere. And then consciousness has that dual lens to it. There's that individual sense of consciousness, myself, and then there is that broader field, which is non-locality itself. So what does this suggest? It suggests that you and I are not local phenomena. We are systemic and we are society-wide phenomena. It's a pretty radical take on things. And therefore, healing is not just about us as individuals. There have to be societal changes, right? There have to be changes in policy. There have to be changes in understanding. There have to be changes in public health. All of these are necessary, and this is an important intrinsic part of second mind medicine, right? The other way it shows up in second mind medicine, this systemic phenomena, is not only through the five bodies, but also through the four pillars, right? Because when we talk about movement, movement is, if it's exercise, if it's doing that 45 minutes or an hour a day or whatever somebody wishes to do, that's great. But that's not movement for everybody, and that doesn't have to be movement for everybody, right? Movement can simply be this. This is movement as well. Let me just come back to this screen. Here we go, right? This is movement as well. Emotional movement, expressing how we're feeling. Intellectual movement, expressing our creative ideas, right? All of this too is part of movement. And that can create some kind of friction with society, because society has certain ideas as to what's acceptable, certain ways to dress, certain ways to feel, certain ways to draw, right? Certain ways to be. And so again, through the four pillars, we're also seeing that we're talking about disease and health and healing as a systemic phenomenon, as systemic events, not just localized in a person. All right. So we've talked about the results healing, moving past fear, disease and healing being systemic events and phenomena. And finally, as a disruptor of healthcare, this is a powerful disruptor, and I would say a single greatest disruptor of healthcare, right? It would be one thing to come up with a healing modality that would cure a disease, right? Certainly that's important, and we always look for that. But it's a different thing to come up with a framework in which that is allowed, in which there's an understanding for how that happens, and in which there is a framework for that within the understanding of each person as an expertise, right? Redefining human anatomy or completing human anatomy and talking about the primacy of consciousness from not only a philosophical, but also a scientific and a direct experiential perspective are fundamentally disruptive, right? They are the greatest disruptions that could happen in healthcare because they challenge the basic assumptions without negating them, without rejecting them. And that is the power here, right? Without rejecting these basic assumptions, we can build on them and show where some of the limitations exist. All right. So when it comes to multi-directional healing, then what does that essentially mean? It simply means, let me go back here. It simply means that wherever we put our attention, right? Remember, we talked about the process of healing. Wherever we put our attention, whichever body on which we put our attention and engage, the effects of that ripple through to in all directions to the other body. So if the attention is here at the mental level, then the effects of that can be seen or felt as a relief in the physical structure, in the energetic structure, and on deeper. If the attention is on the energetic level, again, it filters through or it streams through all the bodies. Same thing at the physical level. A repair at the physical level can address suffering and healing at the mental level too, right? Now, depending on where we start, the depth of that kind of healing and the nature of that healing will be different, of course. But the idea is that these five bodies are not fundamentally different. So wherever we start, the rest of the human system will be affected. Just like in a pool, if we drop a stone somewhere in a pool, the ripple that starts there will extend out throughout the whole pool, right? I can drop it at one corner, I can drop it at another corner, I can drop it in the center, but no matter where we start, it's going to extend out to the whole pool. If we start at the core, of course, it's going to extend evenly out in all directions. This is the idea of multi-directional healing, that wherever we are drawn to, wherever we can engage, there healing can begin and spread. All right. Connected web of social change based on each person's experience. implies a new way of living together. Yes, absolutely. A new way of seeing each other as ourselves, right? Seeing the society as ourselves. I just did a talk earlier today on inner and outer experience and how they are reflections of each other, right? Certainly, the society reflects how we are, and to some extent, we reflect how society is, right? The inner and the outer are reflections of each other. All right. So, this, in a nutshell, are the big points in second mind medicine. If you are a physician or you're an instructor at a medical school or a university and you'd like to hear more about this, please do let me know. You can contact me through the website. Let me just paste this here. Second Mind Medicine. I need your help in getting the word out about this. It is a subtle topic. There are many big pieces together, but if we can pull these together, then we can really develop a new framework that combines philosophy, that combines science, that combines direct experience, and that combines all the different healing systems of the world, right? This isn't about valuing one, it's a underlying framework that touches on all the important points. So if you want to know more about this or if you're involved in research, then please contact me. We can talk. I'm happy to give a presentation on this. If you are another kind of health practitioner, if you teach meditation classes or teach yoga classes and you have many students you think would be interested, please contact me through the website. Let's start talking about this more and bring this to everybody. All right, so next week, I had a lot of questions about mental illness, what mental illness is. So next week, we'll talk about mental illness. And then perhaps the week after that, what I'll do is talk about other models and how they fit into second mind medicine. Like I said before, there are many kinds of healing. There are many approaches to healing, right? So one popular one is somebody mentioned polyvagal theory, right? So how does polyvagal theory fit into second mind medicine? Polyvagal theory is one theory, one kind of approach to healing, right? So where does that fit into the five bodies? What does it imply about our nature? I think what we'll do is we'll take such theories, such approaches to healing one by one, and we'll plug them in to the framework of second mind medicine to show how this integrates all the different systems of healing. All right. Thank you again for the amazing and insightful questions. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for sharing this and bringing this to other audiences. Let's take a minute here. I'll see you next week.